Now to Behind the Wall and the start today of the trial of Australian citizen Yang Hengjun, who has been tried for espionage, and Australia's ambassador has been denied access to attend. Joining us is the ABC's international affairs analyst Stan Grant. Stan, what did you make of what happened today?
Well, the Australian ambassador, Graham Fletcher, is calling this now, Bev, arbitrary detention. He tried to get access, and you're right, he was denied access. Now, under consular treaties, both international through Geneva and, of course, between the Australian and Chinese governments, someone charged, in this case, does have access to consular support. So now, having Australian consular officials, in this case the ambassador, Graham Fletcher, denied access to the court, indicates two things. It indicates, one, that there is a reflection, I suppose, on the state of relations between Australia and China, but also how China sees this case. This is a case of national security. And they say, the Chinese say, that the nature of these charges is why they are denying this consular access. And we still don't know what the evidence is against him, what the charges are against him, what the allegations are against him. All we know is that he has been charged with espionage. This is about state security, and even when it comes to potential sentencing, it could be as little as 3 years, given the time that he served. It could be 10. Some are saying it could be life imprisonment as well. All of these things were unclear because this is a very opaque process.
And to that point, Stan, when do you think he will know the outcome of this trial?
Well, again, we're not clear. This is a very different legal process, to what we're familiar with in Australia. As I mentioned before, lack of legal representation, no clarity around the charges, clarity around the evidence that's to be presented here, what the full allegations are. It's a very different process. Even to get to a trial such as this, in most cases, overwhelmingly, almost 100%, 99% of cases, there is a guilty verdict. So they proceed to trial when they are sure that they are going to get the verdict that they seek, in this case, a guilty verdict. So we're not sure exactly what's going to take place here. Because Australia has not been able to get a consular official in there, we're not hearing about what's taking place inside the court. We could have a verdict, but then there's also suggestions that there will be a verdict trial. So evidence presented, and then later a verdict trial, and then a sentencing handed down after that. But it does go to, just as I said before, the very opaque nature of this process. We're dealing with a very different legal system and a very different legal process. Add to that the fact that you were talking about state security and espionage.
Stan, do you think Australia's deteriorating and very strained relationship with China has been a factor in how he's been treated?
It's the backdrop, isn't it? And that simply can't be denied. We know that there has been a deterioration in relations between Australia and China. Australia is seen by China as taking a more assertive or even aggressive stance towards China, banning Huawei, introducing more laws on foreign interference. China has interpreted those actions as being anti-China actions. They see such things as the Quad agreement between Australia, the United States, Japan and India as being an effort to try to contain China's rise. A lot of this is set against the backdrop of the increasing great superpower rivalry between the United States and China. And of course, Australia is very much caught at the hinge point of that, our great trading relationship with China, but our strategic security friendship with the United States. That's the backdrop to this. And we're not just talking about Yang Hengjun in this case either. We're also talking about Cheng Lei, the Australian journalist who's been working for Chinese Central Television, who's also being detained. Similarly, we're not hearing exactly what for, but on similar charges to this. So all of it now is being interpreted within the framework of this deteriorating relationship between Australia and China.
How precarious does this now make it for Australians working and living in China?
Well, we've already seen those warnings, haven't we, of concern about Australians living and working in China. We're in a situation now that's been described as a new Cold War. This deterioration in relations. Remember our own correspondent, Bill Birtles, our China correspondent at the ABC, having to leave the country. So that's an indication of how relations have deteriorated. That Australia, remember, Bev, was instrumental in opening China back up again. It was Gough Whitlam in 1972, when he was then opposition leader, who travelled to Beijing, even ahead of Richard Nixon travelling there for his historic meeting with Mao Zedong. But for the first time now, we do not have an Australian journalist working for an Australian organisation based inside the country. We know that Australian politicians cannot pick up the phone and speak to their counterparts in Beijing. We've seen trade bans put on Australian exports. Increasingly, we've heard talk of outright conflict. Remember, it was Mike Pizzullo, the Home Affairs Secretary, who said recently about the drumbeats of war. Scott Morrison has talked about entering a more dangerous period. This is reflected in our defence posture, increasing funding for defence, increasing talk of conflict with China. So all of that frames what we're seeing now in this particular case and is an indication of this deteriorating relationship that is being called a new Cold War, and with all of the warnings and all of the caution that needs to be taken now in exactly that atmosphere.
Yeah, very different times. Great to talk, Stan. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Bev.